Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, with a very, very interesting hypothetical question for you. Updates on what's going on in the free agent market. Relief pitchers are definitely starting to heat up. And again, this hypothetical question about what could possibly happen for the Colorado Rockies this time next offseason. Should the 2025 club have the same surge that the one in 2016 had, just ahead of back-to-back postseasons? Not sure if anyone's thinking about going to the playoffs in back-to-back years, but people are definitely thinking about that growth that could happen in 2025. How would the Rockies possibly respond in a scenario like that? Looking into my crystal ball, assuming I have one here. I'll have to look around. Maybe there's one underneath my desk. I'll find it. I'll figure it out. But teams are starting to find out that the free agent market for relievers is beginning to heat up finally. Carlos Estévez, one of those top names right now, the Reds being one of those clubs looking to add this young reliever that, well, I guess he's not young anymore. He's 32 years old. But to me, he'll always be a kid. Talking with him while he was in AAA, trying to figure things out. Debuting in 2016, immediately being the closer for the Rockies in that 2016 season before having some injuries. But Estévez has really shined since leaving Colorado. I said that at the time that the Rockies were going to miss Estévez, mostly not just because of what he brings to the clubhouse, bridging the American players with the Latin American players, but also just being sneaky consistent in that bullpen. The numbers solid, and certainly not as solid as an above average reliever with most teams that pitch anywhere other than Coors Field. But for Estévez, doing it at Coors Field, doing it with the Rockies, a little bit more impressive. And I think since he left on that 2-year deal with the Los Angeles Angels, getting a little bit less money than I thought he would actually get out there in free agency, but he's proven his value in a major way. 3.90 ERA with 31 saves and a 28% strikeout rate in 2023 with the Angels. Stronger start this past year before getting dealt to the Phillies, and the numbers still looking solid in the ERA front. 2.38 ERA with the Phillies. Strikeouts down to about 20%. So that might have some concern for some teams, but many people around the game do think that Estévez is in line for a 3-year deal, potentially worth upwards of $30 million. I thought he was going to get something a lot closer to that when he became a free agent ahead of 2023. I think now that he's established himself away from the Rockies, teams are now saying, okay, this is the guy that we did see a majority of the time in Colorado, in Denver. Now he's been able to do that with some contenders, doing it for the Phillies down the stretch this past season. And the reliever market heating up in general overall. The middle tier, upper tier, I would say for the free agent market has already happened, has already transpired in a lot of ways. Those players have found a home. And you'll also notice there's a trend with these players, these relievers, being a little bit older. In fact, Estévez is a young man compared to the deals that have been signed by back of the game arms already in free agency. Devin Williams, still a young man, very much so. He was a trade from Milwaukee to the Yankees, but all of the other free agents that have signed for significant money in free agency are all age 35, 36, even older than that. We just saw Andrew Kittredge sign a 1-year deal worth $10 million guaranteed with the Baltimore Orioles, club option for him in 2026. Chris Martin goes home to Arlington, turns down even more money from Boston Red Sox, reportedly. He gets a $5 million deal at age 39. Blake Trinan, he's been fantastic when healthy for the Dodgers, gets 2 years, $22 million for his age 37 and age 38 season. Aroldis Chapman was good in Pittsburgh last year. Absolutely. He's going to make even more money now in Boston than he did this past season. $10.75 million in his age 37 season. And finally, Yimi Garcia, $15 million for 2 years, age 34, and age 35 seasons. So again, relief pitchers are definitely a market where if you are older and you found a level of sustained success, teams are willing to pay for that. Not a ton, not $10 million like Andrew Kittredge was guaranteed, but they will guarantee you $5+ million for 1 to 2 seasons if you are a grizzled veteran in that way coming out of the bullpen. It's one of the reasons why every year that Adam Ottavino becomes a free agent, it seems like a really great fit to bring him back for the Rockies bullpen. We know that Colorado is looking to shed some payroll right now, but we also know that in the past, they were very much fine paying $19 million to Daniel Bard to serve not only as the closer, but as a leader in that clubhouse, as a leader in that bullpen, teaching some of those young guys that are in the pen. And right now, it's only Tyler Kinley as one of those veteran guys. Jimmy Herget, you could say, since he's north of 30, could fit into that category, but he's not had the same sustained success as someone like a Carlos Estévez, and certainly not like someone of an Adam Ottavino's ilk. So I don't think the Rockies are going to target any of those kind of players. Maybe David Robertson, he would fill that role, I think, really well. But those pitchers have that kind of value. Yeah, everything could break down. Everything could totally fall apart. Guy might need a Tommy John surgery and decides, I'm not trying to come back in my 40s or even my late 30s like a Jamie Moyer, like Justin Verlander was able to do. They might call it quits. And for the team, that was a 1-year deal, anywhere from $5 to $10 million. No such thing as a bad 1-year deal. So you understand why a lot of these relievers are making this kind of money. The best arm, the best closer, you could say, on the market this offseason is not a household name. It's Tanner Scott, 30 years old, best reliever out there on the market, does have closing experience with his time in Miami, 2.04 ERA over the last 2 seasons, 150 innings of work. The dude goes out there and posts. Think of him somewhat as a poor man's Josh Hader, if you will. He's been really solid, 2.24 ERA plus. That's pretty wild to think about. San Diego did give up a lot. Maybe not a lot, but they gave up a lot of prospect capital to acquire him from the Marlins at this past year's trade deadline as a pure rental. But they thought with him and a couple of the other players that they had added at the deadline, Jason Adam being one of them in their bullpen, that was going to shorten games to 6 innings. If you could get through the first 6 innings, Adam, Tanner Scott, and Robert Suarez were going to shut things down in the 7th, 8th, and 9th for San Diego, and it nearly happened. They did have the Dodgers on the rope, needed one more win in the division series to put away their big brothers in the North. Unfortunately, that did not come to fruition. MLB Trade Rumors thinks that Tanner Scott, going into this offseason, was going to get a 4-year deal worth about $56 million, and I still think that is going to end up being, give or take, what he sees from the team that eventually signs him. The Mets have shown interest. They very well can afford him, and they would not be using him as a closer. They already got Edwin Diaz. Let's not forget about that. But does he provide that perfect left-handed leverage reliever late in games where they can deploy him, where at times there could be more vital outs to be had, maybe in the 6th, 7th, or 8th? Absolutely. That would be one of the more underrated signings, I think, for the Mets this offseason. That being said, they did commit $800 million to one of the best young players in the game in Juan Soto. But Tanner Scott, look, he is going to be in there to get some of the biggest outs, the most highest leverage outs in games that the Mets are going to have this season. So you certainly would understand why that would fit. Dean in the chat. Dean, thanks for joining me today on the Rockies Insider Podcast. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel, to the podcast. Bo would be delightful. Imagine that. Again, I will set the scene for you here very shortly, how Bo Bichette ends up with the Colorado Rockies. Why the Colorado Rockies would really be interested in him. Of course, they're interested in him, as any team would be interested in a player of Bichette's caliber, but why it would actually make sense for them to target him in free agency next offseason. Pete Alonso's market, speaking of Mets and speaking of free agency, continues to take shape. It seems like one day Alex Bregman is in the news. The next, it's Pete Alonso, Scott Boras trying to find the right fit. And by right fit, I mean the right amount of money. Looks like the numbers currently being quoted. Now, Mark Feinsand said, the deal might be similar to what Prince Fielder made in free agency. If you can remember back to then, 14 years ago, it was a 9-year, $214 million contract. That was a much younger player who was going into his age 28 season. Alonso now going into his age 30 season. We're also talking about money from 2010, 2011. That $214 million then is probably a lot closer to 300, maybe even 350 right now in free agency. Scott Boras kicking back saying, well, hey, wait a minute. That was a deal from 14 years ago. But I think in general, Alonso and Scott Boras would love something in the ballpark of 9 years. I'm sure they would settle for 7 if they can get more than $200 million for a lumbering first baseman. We know they don't age very well. $200 million would be great. So I think 7 years, $200 million gets the deal done. We'll wait and see if spring training has to start before Alonso finds a home and before Bregman finds a home. It didn't work out very well for a lot of those free agents last offseason that Boras was signing very late. And I don't think he wants that same situation going on right now. It's a little bit different with the hitters. We saw Matt Chapman have a nice adjustment on the pitching side. It took a while for Blake Snell to get going since he didn't have a normal spring training. Jordan Montgomery never got going at any point with Arizona last year for similar reasons. So you want these deals to get done, finalized, so that the players can get ready for the 162-game marathon. And Boras is really up against it, I think, right now, trying to find that right destination for both Alonso and Alex Bregman. Fenway Fest is going to go down on Saturday in Boston. That's their version of Rockies Fest, their version of Fan Fest. A lot of player and personnel appearances. The cool thing going down at Fenway Fest that I found was that the event is going to include a preview of the upcoming Netflix documentary that covered the 2024 season from the Boston Red Sox. And I think it was a little disappointing for me for a couple of reasons, or a couple of things are disappointing, is that we didn't get a chance to see the 2024 season in 2024. Hard Knocks, I mean, you can't get any better than that as far as sports programming is concerned. And it would have been great if we could have seen weekly updates or bi-weekly updates, monthly updates even, on the 2024 Rockies season, the 2024 Red Sox season. That didn't happen, but we will get that eventually. Even more disappointing for me is that this is not coming back for 2025. There are no plans in place for Netflix to film along with the team for the duration of a season. Again, I don't know if they were waiting to get some feedback, get some reaction from audiences. If this ended up working out, maybe it doesn't translate as well for baseball. Maybe it translates a lot better to football when there are only 17 games. So you're building up for those 17 episodes, if you will. And, you've got summer camp going on as players are trying to make the team and you're able to get to know those players. There's a lot less guys on a big league roster. You lump in the coaching staff, now you've got a little bit more. And with guys going on the IL and coming up for a cup of coffee, you still have an opportunity of about 50 or so guys, similar to what you would see on a football team. So I think there are opportunities there that maybe need to come to fruition more over the course of a year. Because sure, while there might be 50 different stories, 50 different people whose stories can be told over the course of a baseball season, it takes the 7 to 8 months of the baseball season. Whereas as soon as teams are reporting to camp, and for the NFL, you already have those 50 plus guys set in stone that you are watching week in and week out. So that is a little disappointment that we're not going to get that again. That's not going to be anything that is consistent. Maybe they will make tweaks. Maybe we'll get a surprise announcement, but by all accounts from everyone I've spoken to about the situation, there's not going to be another one of these Netflix documentaries like we are going to get this year covering the 2024 Boston Red Sox. It's also probably disappointing for some of you who might be waiting with bated breath. The big incident, the big bench clearing incident from this past summer on July 24th between the Rockies and Red Sox at Coors Field. Rockies totally whooped the Red Sox butt. Cal Quantrill very excited, getting himself out of a jam. Reese McGuire taking offense to this, thinking that perhaps he was being shouted at, and then Cal Quantrill just with the all-time, it wasn't even a comeback because really he was the aggressor there in terms of put downs are concerned, but bench clearing incident. You've got Red Sox players trying to get into the Rockies clubhouse. You've got the potential for the two teams meeting up at the airport as they're flying out of Denver. Is something going to happen there? Thankfully, cooler heads did prevail, but the Netflix cameras were not there on the scene for that. Could they still get some footage elsewhere from MLB? Could they still talk with players about that? Is that something that's going to be on the cutting room floor, perhaps? We'll kind of wait and see what happens, but I hope we get something. I hope we get something, some players discussing that incident between the Rockies and Red Sox, between Quantrill and Reese McGuire. I want to say that it might have been somewhat of a turning point for the Red Sox. It wasn't terribly drastic, but when Boston entered that game on July 24th, they did have the sixth best record in the American League. They were 7 games over 500 and were only 1.5 games back of the final wild card. They were 4.5 games ahead of eventual wild card club, the Detroit Tigers. After July 24th, they would go on to finish 9th in the American League, falling back 3 slots. They were now 7 games under 500 as opposed to 7 games over when they entered that day. They went 27-34. Conversely, the Rockies got a decent amount better from that point forward. 26-34, it's a 400 winning percentage. But even still, you have a 400 winning percentage in 2025, you are avoiding 100 losses. So that certainly was an improvement. So it'll be interesting to see if we get to see, for those who are not at Fenway Fest, if you do get an opportunity to see some of the Netflix documentary coming up here very soon about the 2024 Boston Red Sox. Now, the Rockies Fest, there was an announcement on social media on Friday that the Rockies are going to allow fans to have an opportunity to take a photograph of the National League Gold Glove Awards that were won this past year by Ezequiel Tovar and Brenton Doyle. That's a pretty cool little tidbit. If you are going to Rockies Fest, not enough time to do everything, in my opinion, unless you're a season ticket holder and maybe you get the fast pass. I'm not sure all those kind of details, but it's a lot. If you're a baseball fan, you love baseball, you love the players, you might be frustrated with the team and the organization, the franchise in general, but you love Coors Field, you'll get a chance to go there. You love the players, you can get a chance to mingle with some of them, get some autographs, maybe even take some photographs with those guys, win some various prizes that they'll be giving out. And it's a really cool event. And so now to know that you could possibly get a photograph with one of the Gold Glove Awards, I can't say that I've ever done that. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty neat thing for the event coming up on January 25th. Tickets, I believe, are still on sale. I don't think it's sold out. I have no idea what the capacity is. What's like the max number of tickets you could sell to Rockies Fest. Hopefully the weather will be nice so everyone can go out and not have to stress. No one will have to cancel their plans. There won't be any young fans out there that get disappointed by any kind of cancellation that you and your family might make. Rockies Fest is going to go on, I think, regardless, unless there's some kind of crazy snowstorm. Even still, I think they'll probably end up going through with it because there are flights, man. All these players coming back, 31 players on the 40-man roster. Tons of other prospects are also going to be there at Coors Field for this event coming up in 2 weeks' time. It's right around the corner. Rockies Fest. Pretty cool thing going on each and every offseason now that we can say that, assuming we're not going to get another pandemic ever again, God forbid. Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons, your Rockies Insider, talking about and speculating on who the Rockies could target in free agency this time next off season, because we saw the Rockies make those kind of moves ahead of 2016. And then in 2017, sure enough, it was the postseason. Who are those players going to be in 2025-26 offseason? I've got some names to point out. Very interesting names, to say the least. Let's see if my crystal ball turns up. I did want to give you some more information on the arbitration deadline day fallout. Only 17 players ended up filing for arbitration with their team, meaning they don't have a one-year deal figured out just yet. Angels and Cardinals leading the way with 3 players each. And for most of these situations, the discrepancy between what the player feels they're worth, that would be the high number, and what the team thinks the player is worth, the low number, it's really not that bad. Luis Rengifo has a $150,000 gap as a difference. Not a lot. The biggest gap is $2.5 million, which isn't that crazy because we've seen a lot worse. We've definitely seen a lot larger discrepancies, but Kyle Tucker, Cubs, saying he is worth $15 million, whereas Tucker in his representation thinks $17.5 million is the better figure. Michael King of the Padres, he's putting his number in at $8.8 million, whereas the team has $7.325 million. And for the Padres, who we know they're going to really start to have to scrimp and save just a little bit, that $1.5 million roughly is pretty important to them. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they can agree on something before actually going to arbitration. Hearings begin on January 27th and could run as deep as February 14th. But as I said the other day, if you're listening to the podcast or watching over on YouTube, this is really just a formality. Bad blood can build. Bad blood can definitely come out of these arbitration hearings. Corbin Burns, he was left with a very bad taste in his mouth with the Milwaukee Brewers because of some of the things that were said. Because you have to, in order to get your way as the team, you have to essentially say some disparaging things about your player to these arbiters and say, here's why this player is worth the lower number. You're going to hear why he's worth the higher number, but we're going to try to tell you why he's worth the lower number. And in the case of Burns and the Brewers, Milwaukee said one of the reasons they missed the postseason was because of a bad start down the stretch by Corbin Burns, saying Burns was the reason we missed the postseason. So he's not worth that kind of money. That's bad blood right there. Absolutely. So you want to avoid those kind of things at all costs. Right now, 17 are going to trial. Well, as I've been teasing here for a little while, 2026. We don't know what's going to happen in 2025, but we know that the Rockies think that they could take a big step forward in the win-loss column. I think they're going to take a big step forward in terms of turning the keys over to the young players because they have a fewer amount of veterans and a lot more young players that they need to find out about. Next offseason, there are going to be a lot of players who were drafted 4 years ago, or rather 3 years ago, and have played for 4 years or 5 years in the terms of some of these high school players and international free agents, that they're going to have to protect a lot of players on the 40-man roster. And some of them could end up getting poached in the Rule 5 draft. You certainly don't want that to happen. You do want to know what you have. Because once you know what you have, and you have a much better understanding of the caliber of player and the caliber of depth that you have, now you can go and negotiate and navigate free agency, trades, and say, you know what, we do have a lot of depth in this area. Or we might not have a ton of depth, but we've got a ton of certainty in this one area. So any of that depth that we have, maybe we don't need quite as much. Now we can go ahead and trade from that area of depth, trade from a strength, and go ahead and make the team better in other areas. That's really what's at stake in 2025. So you look at 2025 as being that blueprint for 2016, where it was the final year of Walt Weiss's managerial term with the Rockies, and he really felt that they had taken a major step forward. They had turned the keys over to a lot of the younger players. Trevor Story, his rookie season, you got to see Carlos Estévez as the club's closer. Germán Marquez had made his debut, and so the team was looking a little bit stronger, and GM Jeff Bridich made those investments going into 2017, which, regardless of whether or not you think those contracts were worth what they were given to those players, it did result in back-to-back post seasons. Absolutely. B in our chat saying, thoughts on Hoffman to Toronto? I have not heard that yet. Got to go over to the notifications. Are the Blue Jays interested in Jeff Hoffman? Has he signed there? Would he be a good fit? Look, we know that the Blue Jays thought well enough of him back in 2014, drafting him at East Carolina University. I want to say it was 9th overall. So they've already been tied to him, and he didn't get a ton of opportunities with the club before they ended up trading him in the Troy Tulowitzki deal, which worked out for Toronto. They did make back-to-back postseasons themselves, but there is that familiarity that Hoffman does have with the Toronto Blue Jays. Also seeing here, Anthony Franco of MLB Trade Rumor said that the Orioles backed out of an agreement with Jeff Hoffman after a flagged physical. And B, as you pointed out, appreciate it in the chat. Really appreciate it. Yeah, Jeff Hoffman, 3-year, $33 million contract as reported by Robert Murray of Fansided. The deal with the Orioles, reportedly 3 years, $40 million before backing out after this flagged physical. But I think that's a good deal. I think that's an interesting signing, to say the least, when you consider that Hoffman is more likely than not going to be giving an opportunity to be in the starting rotation. He has that pedigree in his past. Wheels kind of fell off a little bit after being traded to the Cincinnati Reds. Couldn't gain traction in Colorado. But once he moved to Philadelphia, the last 2 years have been really outstanding. They've been really good, and he's shown an ability to be effective with not just 2 pitches, which is very common for relievers, but he's got 3+. And so I think that is a really shrewd pickup for a starting pitcher right now on the market who could end up playing up. We saw Jordan Hicks now go forward. We saw him sign a deal to be a starter with San Francisco. That's worked out really well so far. And if it doesn't, they know that they've got a really strong back of the bullpen arm. You're probably paying him more than you would like to if he then becomes a reliever, but that's worked out really well. Reynaldo Lopez, that deal has worked out really well for Atlanta. Those swingman type starters that have had a lot of success as a reliever. And so now Jeff Hoffman joins that list, as pointed out in the chat. They now have 2 Colorado haters. Kevin Gossman is actually from Colorado, so he's not hating on Colorado. No, I can't get behind that one possibly. But yes, two starting pitchers with a lot of familiarity with the altitude in Colorado. One probably feels a little bit better than the other one. So Toronto, I think they're really hedging their bet here just a little bit with that free agency of Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero looming after 2025, meaning, yes, they will be in play for the Rockies next offseason should Colorado want to make a splash. We know Bassett doesn't have very much longer to go. Same thing with Kevin Gausman. So Toronto has got to figure out if they're going to rebuild, which it looks like they're not here, or if they're going to go all in. And it seems like they might be taking half measures. They're also trying to acquire these players. We know that they were in on Shohei Ohtani. That unfortunately didn't work. We know they were in on Juan Soto. That didn't play out. We'll see if Roki Sasaki ends up going north of the border to Canada. But Toronto, I think they're doing their best. They're not 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They want to be both feet in, but it's just that the players are not coming to them unfortunately for them and unfortunately for anyone that is a Blue Jay fan. But getting back to the Rockies, we'll talk more about Bichette and Vlad Guerrero and their free agency coming up here in just a moment. But when you look at what Colorado did in the 2016-2017 offseason, when they got themselves on a much better track, Walt Weiss helping these young guys come to fruition a little bit more so just before they brought in Bud Black. That was somewhat of an underrated free agent pickup, if you will. They went out and got the guy that definitely at the time was the right fit. They needed a guy that knew pitching, that knew the NL West, that knew Coors Field. And Bud Black, with his time with the San Diego Padres, felt like the right fit. And at that time, I've said it before, if I told anyone that would listen, the Rockies aren't going to go after Bud Black because that makes too much sense. That's the perfect guy to get. They're going to end up settling for someone like Ron Renicky. And the Rockies went out and got Bud Black. They got the right guy for the job. And we saw what happened. Back-to-back postseasons in 17 and 18. So he was a free agent acquisition after that successful 2016 campaign. Ian Desmond got the 5-year, $70 million deal. Lefty reliever Mike Dunn, 3 years, 19. And then closer Greg Holland got $6 million guaranteed. Ended up becoming the comeback player of the year in the National League. Made the All-Star team with the Rockies in 2017. So you look at that group and say, well, you got one All-Star appearance out of it. Mike Dunn was good for about a year and a half. I think you could say the same thing about Wade Davis and Brian Shaw and Jake McGee that next offseason when they made those moves. You got 2 really solid years out of Ian Desmond, underrated seasons, a 2020 campaign, which you shouldn't shake a stick at. I think that 5-year, $70 million deal was a little bit overblown at the time in terms of, hey, this guy needs to be doing a lot more, because I think Ian Desmond was doing a lot for the Rockies. Most of it was behind the scenes. But I also think, and a lot of folks do agree with this sentiment, that wins above replacement, I don't know that it really has Coors Field figured out. I don't know that it is exact. It definitely takes away a lot from a player's value. You look at someone like Dante Bichette, and there are years in which, despite putting up 40 home runs, 120 RBI, batting near 300, he was considered an average player because of how bad his defense was, because of how defense is rated at a ballpark like Coors Field with the largest outfield in baseball. So I think there could be some calibration issues when it comes to a lot of Rockies players. And it's for that reason you look at Ian Desmond and say, he might not have been worth that money, but it was not an awful signing. I think Rockies fans know an awful signing when they see one. Mike Hampton wasn't an awful signing. I would say it's probably worse than Ian Desmond, but overall, these were not terribly bad signings. You go around baseball and there are teams that have all kinds of dead money going to players that have done nothing in the majors, that have not contributed in the same way that Mike Hampton did or Ian Desmond did. There are absolute albatross contracts all around Major League Baseball. And Ian Desmond's deal was not one. And I really don't think Mike Hampton's deal was one either. So we see those moves after 2016. And you say, well, what could the Rockies do this time next year? And before I get to that, and I don't know, maybe I'm cutting myself off at the knees, but I would argue that the rebuild that the Rockies were a part of and the restructuring and getting back on track that they were able to do from 2009 up to 2018, 8 consecutive years without a postseason appearance, 2009 to 2017, those moves started ahead of 2016. Those moves started after 2015 when it seemed like there's no reason that they should be making any kind of moves whatsoever. But Jeff Bridich was finally running his ship. He had cleared some payroll with the Troy Tulowitzki trade. and ahead of 2016. So before they made that growth, they made some investments in free agency. They did get Chad Qualls and Jason Mott, who you can look back and argue what their value was. Again, on field is one thing. Behind the scenes and in the clubhouse, it's another. But a veteran presence in the bullpen. Also ahead of 2016, they signed arguably one of the best free agents the club has ever signed. Wins above replacement aside, because that's not going to help you out too much. But Gerardo Parra, 3-year deal. 3-year deal for El Yolo. That was a great signing. That was ahead of its time. Going into 2016, adding a Gerardo Parra is like a, you know, what's the point of this move? Because what's the direction that the team is going? It's a decent signing. It ended up being great. He contributed a lot to the club. Again, both on the field and in the clubhouse as a leader for a lot of those Latin American players. So the growth that was seen in 2016, Rockies started that the offseason before that. And they haven't really done that this offseason. So I'd almost argue that next offseason is going to be the one in which they make fringy moves before a big splash ahead of 2027. But if they make that growth this year, all bets are off. They could go out and do something significant. They absolutely could do that. We were surprised when Ian Desmond was signed. We were surprised when Mike Hampton signed. We were surprised when Chris Bryant signed a year after they got rid of Nolan Arenado's contract. So anything is possible, especially if the Rockies can surge in 2025. So here's who's available out there in free agency and why they might be a fit. First off, if you're looking at catcher, how about Salvador Perez? Owed $13.5 million for 2026. It's a club option with a $2 million buyout. If the Royals do decide they want to move on from Salvi, Perez would be a very nice fit. You got to think as the backup, as the veteran presence for whoever takes the lead, whoever takes the ball and runs with it this year. Is it going to be Drew Romo? Will it be Hunter Goodman as that catcher of the future? Could you have both of those guys doing it in 2026, getting all 162 starts? Possibly, but we do know how much the Rockies like their veteran catchers. We know how much Bud Black likes his veteran catchers. So if you're going to have a veteran catching 2 out of every 5 days, Salvador Perez, it really doesn't get much better than that. And with that postseason presence that he has had in the past, that postseason experience, that could be a really nice fit at maybe only $10 million for 1 year. That would be a great veteran signing for a guy that, again, would be more of a backup than a starter. But even if he's going 40% of the time, that is a guy you want in your clubhouse. JT Realmuto, also going to be a free agent after this next season, but I think probably not. He's kind of getting old a little bit quickly. It's not clear what his next step is going to be with Philadelphia. Now at first base, bottom line is Michael Toglia. He is the first baseman of the future. But if Colorado really thinks a Josh Naylor or a Luis Ariz could end up making a difference, and knowing that Toglia can go to right field, this could be an option. Now with Luis Ariz, I would say no, because we are really looking at a replay of the Daniel Murphy situation. You've got a hitter whose approach seems like a lock for a batting title at Coors Field, then unfortunately doesn't do a ton at first base. That could be Luis Ariz. Now, he would only be 29 years old. He is from Venezuela. You might be able to get him to play a little bit of second base. I don't think you should. So I don't know that he is a good fit. Naylor could end up working out. Again, that's if you decide Toglia might be better suited in right field and you give yourself a little bit of that flexibility, you could go that way. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be a free agent next offseason, but there's no way. He's set to probably make at least $400 million in free agency, and I don't think the Rockies need to be in on that market. If you're one player away and you've got that kind of money to spend, which the Rockies don't right now, then yeah, you go after that guy. But the Rockies are not in that kind of situation. Guerrero's at 160 home runs right now, so he should be a lock for 500 home runs if he does come to the Rockies, and would, of course, be the first Rocky to ever reach 500 career home runs. My question for you, think about it for a moment. Who has the most home runs by a player who's ever worn purple? First two names on the top of your head: Larry Walker, 389. Todd Helton, 369. Walker has 383. Now, you could say Dwight Evans, he wore purple as the team's hitting coach in 1994. He had 385 career home runs, 2 more than Larry Walker, but no, we're not going to count that. Dale Murphy had 398. Latched on with the Rockies there in 1993, hoping to get 2 more to reach 400. Didn't happen. Andres Galarraga, 399, 1 homer away from 400. But number one, the man who is 44th all time in terms of career home runs with 440, that's right, the great Giambino, Jason Giambi, is number one in terms of players who wore purple at one point. At second base, this time next year, mostly stopgap options, some with some upside. We'll see what happens with Kyle Farmer and Thairo Estrada. Both of those players have mutual options for 2026. So this seems like an area where the Rockies are probably not going to make a jump at a big free agent. Brandon Lowe, possible. He's got $11.5 million option. Luis Rengifo, Ahmed Rosario, Gleyber Torres. Do those move the needle very much? Probably not, especially when you think Ryan Ritter or Adiel Amador are going to be the starting second baseman on opening day in 2026. At shortstop, you're saying don't even think about it, except when you look at the shortstop free agents, one name absolutely jumps out, and it's Bo Bichette. He's only going to be 28 years old in 2026. He's a great defender at shortstop, which means he can easily move over to third base and be fine. And you're reunited with the Bichette family. Because it's probably going to be a while if the Rockies ever want to get their hands on Jackson Holliday. But you can have Bo Bichette. Bichette can happen twice in a lifetime. It's going to take a lot of money. No doubt about it. It's not going to be Vlad Guerrero Jr. money, but it could be $300 million. And at that point, are the Rockies looking for a new name on the marquee? Are they looking for a new poster boy? Will they have moved on from Chris Bryant at that point, at least in terms of thinking that he is going to be the big name that's going to bring in those big crowds? Maybe one of the young players continues to make growth. Does Doyle become a superstar to the extent of Bo Bichette? Maybe. Tovar, also potential. A lot of young guys that have even yet to make their debut could become superstars in that vein, but it's not going to happen in the year. So you still need to think about that marquee. And for the Rockies, the familiar names are the marquee names. So are they going to be okay with just leaving Ryan McMahon's name on the marquee? I think so. That they're very much going to be all right with that. Could they look to rekindle a relationship with Trevor Story? Now, he can opt out after this year, but if he does, he's going to be going back out as a free agent in his age 33 season, and he's going to be turning down 2 years, $55 million. I don't really see that happening, even if he has an all-star season this year. It just is hard for me to think that he could get 3 years, $60 million with some of the injury concerns over the last 3 years that he's had. Maybe 4 years, $70 million. It could be, because the crop of shortstops next offseason, not great. You could go the frugal route in Orlando Arcia, Willie Castro, 37-year-old Miguel Rojas, I don't think so. And then there's Bichette. That's why there's a 0% chance Bichette agrees to any kind of extension with Toronto. He's going to bet on himself after a rough injury-plagued 2024. He can go out on top, go into free agency on top, and then everyone's going to forget about 2024 because you had a big 2025. Could have some shortstops on longer-term deals that could go out into the trade market, that could impact free agency. So I wouldn't say never when it comes to Trevor Story and opting out. But he's going to need to have just a fantastic season. Sam in the chat saying, Bichette worth $300 million. I don't know, mate. I do. Look, one of the reasons why Juan Soto was able to get $800 million was because he had just turned 26 years old, was still really young. You were paying not just for the age 30, the age 35, and then you're forced to pay for those years at the end, age 38, age 39. You're forced to pay for those in free agency. But the Mets are also getting prime age 26, 27, 28, 29. That has a ton of value for teams. And so for for Bo Bichette to be going to free agency in his age 28 season, that has got a lot of value to teams. They're going to pay for that. A premium defender. Before the setbacks of last season, he got MVP votes the previous 3. Was an all-star in 2021 and 2023. 100 RBI campaign in 2021. 20-plus homers during that 3-year stretch of 21 through 2023. Led the American League in base hits from 21 to 22. And I think when you look at I've said this before here on the Rockies Insider podcast, when you go ahead and you look at similar players over on Baseball Reference, you get an idea of the caliber of guy that you've got. And the most similar player to Bo Bichette right now through his age 26 season is Corey Seager. That's a pretty good comp. If you look by the age, you've got Corey Seager for his age 23 season, Troy Tulowitzki for age 24 and 25, and then Corey Seager for his age 26. Injuries aside for Troy Tulowitzki, you're looking at a player that was on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I think we would know here in Colorado. You had a player on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I think Corey Seager is somewhat on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I think he still needs some help, but as a guy who is a 2-time World Series MVP, that does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to getting into Cooperstown. Rounding out his similar batters through age 26, rounding out Bo Bichette's similar batters. Number 1 is Corey Seager, Johnny Peralta, Asdrubal Cabrera. Both had longer careers, maybe not as star-studded, but did both have longer careers. Number 4, Javi Baez. That one doesn't look good on your resume. Number 5, Troy Tulowitzki. Number 6, Ernie Banks. That's a pretty good group of players right there to give you an idea of how well Bichette is going to age. And because he is a shortstop, he will have that ability to move to another position if need be. He's athletic. That's not a problem. If he was a catcher and all of a sudden you can't catch behind the plate, now your offense over at first base is a little more suspect. That's what's going to happen with Wilson Contreras going forward. Cardinals paid him to be a catcher. Now that he's a first baseman, that contract doesn't look quite as strong. His numbers aren't going to look quite as strong unless that kind of move keeps him a little bit healthier and you do get something else out of him now on the wrong side of 30. But that position is everything. So as a shortstop, for him to be putting up the seasons that he's been is much more of a rarity. You move him to third base, now all of a sudden you need closer to 30 home runs rather than 20-25. But even still, I think Bo Bichette is going to age nicely. That's why $300 million is on the table for Bichette, so long as he has another really solid season in 25. so long as it looks a lot more like 2021 through 2023, when he averaged nearly a 5-win season during that stretch. Now, getting back to that shortstop market, as I said, I think Trevor Story probably not going to want to get to free agency. Nobody else on the third base market next offseason is of major intrigue. Max Muncy has a $10 million team option, so he could be back relatively cheap. Eugenio Suarez, probably not. But again, if you are going to have someone like Bichette move over to third base because there is a premium defender already at shortstop, which would be the case for the Rockies, then all of a sudden, Bichette as a third baseman, very attractive. It also means that if you already have an above average third baseman for trade this time next year, you're going to have several teams interested. In the outfield, left field, how about a Tyler O'Neill? How many could he possibly hit at Coors Field? He does have, I know he just signed a 3-year deal with Baltimore, but he does have an opt-out after this season. So he signed a 3-year, $49.5 million deal. They moved in that wall in left field at Camden Yards. But if he's got another breakout season, O's won't hesitate to give him a qualifying offer, which then means the Rockies would likely be out. Because Colorado, and no small market team, unless they are right there, unless they are on that precipice of a postseason and they are one player away, you can't afford to give up a draft pick. You absolutely cannot. So if Tyler O'Neill has that big season and does opt out, expect a qualifying offer, expect him to reject it, and expect the Rockies to not be players on him whatsoever. Also in the chat, Ryan McMahon should have won a Gold Glove Award. Can't argue with you on that. I mean, he's a perennial finalist. He's been runner-up. He's been Mr. Congeniality just about every single year. He's going to break through at some point. I think he will. Now, in center field, no, the Rockies are not going to be targeting a center fielder next offseason. They've got Brenton Doyle there, even if he somehow takes a step back or just has, an injury-plagued campaign, whatever it might be. They're not going to try to insert a free agent center fielder. But I will say someone like Trent Grisham is very interesting to me. Now, this is a dude that already has 2 Gold Gloves. Seems like he was forgotten about a little bit once he was traded from San Diego to the Yankees this last offseason. But he's got 2 Gold Glove awards. You put him in one of the corners at Coors Field, Doyle and Grisham, they're going to be able to track down a lot of baseballs. Your team is going to be that much better. How many runs do they save on your pitchers' ERAs? Maybe it lowers everybody's ERA by a quarter run across the board. Absolutely could see that. But you're saying, well, Patrick, corner outfielders is the thing that the Rockies have a plethora of, at least in the minor league system, nearly on their way to the majors, AA, AAA. Well, again, this is where the Rockies can start to make moves like they did ahead of 2016. Because that offseason, they took their outfield depth and they dealt Corey Dickerson to the Tampa Bay Rays, also dealt prospect Kevin Padlo to the Rays for Jake McGee, which bolstered their bullpen. And they also got a young pitcher that had yet to make his AA debut in Germán Marquez. Still to this day, one of the best trades in Rockies history that was created because of a depth situation in the outfield. It wasn't Charlie Blackmon that they traded. It was Corey Dickerson. They picked the right guy. Their evaluation was right on the money. And so you bring in Trent Grisham for one of the corners, for him and Doyle to patrol the outfield. Then you use one of your young corner outfielders as a trade chip to improve an area of weakness, either in your bullpen, either in your rotation, or to bolster the farm system a little bit. And you've got yourself a win-win trade. In the chat, feels like Trent is a Coors killer. I mean, anyone who's been on the Padres in the late 2010s, early 2020s has pretty much been a Coors killer. So I think Grisham would be a really good fit for the Rockies. I think that would be a great addition next offseason. Again, we don't know the personnel that's going to take that step forward. If we just say the Rockies are going to be a lot better in 2025, and then in 2026, they're able to bridge that gap with a couple moves, these are some of the guys that they could target. If Nolan Jones and Jordan Beck on both sides of Brett and Doyle end up having outstanding seasons where you immediately see them as that next Brett and Doyle, all of a sudden, you're not going after one of these free agent outfielders. It's really as simple as that. I think Cody Bellinger could be one of those guys, center, right field. He can also play first base. He's got a $25 million player option for 2026. Even if he does decide to stick around with the Yankees, he's only going to be 30 years old ahead of the 2026 season. So, or actually after the 2026 season. So it'll be interesting to see what he ends up deciding. Kyle Tucker's in a similar boat. He's going to be a free agent after this year. He's nowhere near the same defensively. He doesn't have the same defensive prowess as Cody Bellinger does. Doesn't have the same positional flexibility either. His peak is probably a little bit better than Bellinger right now when you're talking about value, although Bellinger has had the higher peak than Kyle Tucker has ever had. Tucker's 28 right now. He'll be 29 ahead of 2026. So, they are somewhat similar players, but Tucker, he might be destined to be a DH here very soon. So I don't know that Tucker is the left-handed outfield bat that you are trying to target in a year from now. Jock Peterson's a DH. He can opt out after his first year in Texas, but would the Rockies really be able to afford to clog up the DH spot? I know it's already clogged up right now with Chris Bryant. We'll see if maybe he can play a little bit of right field. But I don't think you want to clog up your DH spot, especially with the amount of talented young bats that are currently in the system that are not only going to debut in 2025, but have already debuted for the Rockies. So you want to free that spot up to see if you've got some value. We think of DH as being an older lumbering player, maybe not even lumbering, maybe just older. But you could have a young guy that is 23, 24 years old that maybe doesn't have a position just yet. Why don't they have a position? That is somewhat of a separate question, but Charlie Condon could be the starting DH on opening day in 2026. That is not crazy. He might not have a position exactly. And even if he is very capable of playing an average corner outfield in the majors, Beck, Jones, maybe Yanquiel Fernandez could surprise. Zach Veen is certainly an above-average defender. Those guys are going to be starting in your outfield. So when we talk about DHs, it isn't always just the older player. Charlie Condon could be the starting DH on opening day in 2026 because you have better defenders in the outfield. So you don't want to clog up that DH spot with someone like a Jock Peterson should he opt out after 2025, even if you feel like you might be one veteran bat away from making a difference and getting back to the postseason. You don't want to do that. Justin, thanks for jumping in here in the chat live over on YouTube. Make sure you're leaving comments even after the fact, after a video goes live and you see something that strikes your intrigue. Leave a comment. I get to see all those. I can comment. We can start a conversation and a chat. Appreciate you joining tonight. Justin, what about starting pitching? What about relief pitching? Honestly, it feels a little disingenuous to even discuss starting pitchers, especially when you consider that the last starting pitcher free agent that the Rockies signed to a big league deal was Kyle Kendrick in 2015. Next month, February 4th, will hit the 10th anniversary of the last time the Rockies signed a free agent pitcher to a guaranteed big league deal. They just don't do that anymore right now. And I think they can get away with that as long as they can make some shrewd trades, like with Herman Marquez, like with Cal Quantrill, like with Austin Gomber, if you forget about what they had to give up. But you can acquire quality starting pitching in a trade. If you are looking to target some middle tier free agents next offseason, you wouldn't like a reunion with John Gray. You wouldn't like a reunion with a Tyler Anderson. Those would be quality veteran pickups that know Coors Field. Would they really want to come back here and go through that again? I honestly think they'd be more likely to than someone who's never experienced Coors Field. I think it's more likely that a Gray or Tyler Anderson would say, man, it is a little bit rough, but I know that I can deal with that. I know I can get through that kind of experience. And I also know that when I get done, there's still going to be teams interested in my services because they were interested in the past too, and know that I'm much more of just some kind of Coors Field creation, or I'm much more than what some of the numbers might suggest. So it's more likely that a Gray or Tyler Anderson would come back as a free agent starting pitcher to the Rockies in a year from now. Are they going to need that? Well, I've talked about it before. There's an article going up over on Just Baseball about the Rockies starting pitching depth, about how strong it is right now. But Marquez and Gomber are free agents after this year. After 2026, it's Freeland. Does have an option for 2027, but it's Freeland and Senzatella. So 4/5 of your rotation is going to be a free agent here by the end of next season. It's one of the reasons why you need these young guys to get more opportunities in the rotation so you can help with that transition. In the chat, pointing out Carson Palmquist is one of those guys. He's going to be in the mix for that 5th starter spot in the rotation. Now, if Marquez and Senzatella are healthy, and it looks like they're going to be able to go for a full season, relatively speaking, because they're going to have to protect them just a little bit in their first full year back from Tommy John surgery. But if those guys are ready to go, your rotation is set in stone, and all those young guys are going back to AAA. But if they want to hedge their bets just a little bit, if they want to try their own version of the 6-man rotation, Carson Palmquist, as you point out in the chat, he's got to be one of the first guys up. He's got the most AAA experience, struggled with Albuquerque once he got promoted, but he is still a guy that has an opportunity to make this team on opening day. And from some of the folks that I've spoken to in the Rockies organization, he actually has an inside track, I think, as being the team's long reliever for 2025. Long reliever with a couple spot starts in there mixed in as well. Could Brandon Woodruff be one of those free agents, starting pitchers that the Rockies bring in? He does have experience at Colorado Springs back in the final years of the Sky Sox when he was coming up from the Brewers. That's a possibility. But more likely, the relievers could happen for this team if they are able to get back on track in 2025 and take a major step forward. I think a 10-win improvement, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but a 10-win improvement is not crazy. Getting to 71 wins could be enough for the front office, for owner Dick Monfort to say, you know what? Let's start to invest a little bit more in this team. Now, it was from 2015 to 2016, it was a 7-win improvement, but you're also talking about a 2015 club that only lost 94 games and not 101 games. So Rockies were able to get to 75 wins in 2016. I think if you can get to at least 70, 71, a 10-win improvement, you're going to get a much better investment from the front office in the 2026 club. But the relievers are where they could probably go shopping in free agency. Maybe get one big-time closer, one mid-tier reliever. We're not going to see that super bullpen again. We know, unfortunately, from history that when the Rockies try something different and it doesn't work, unfortunately, they write it off and say, we will never do that again. It's a small sample size, but they're not just going to do that again. As KI points out in our chat, KI, welcome to the Rockies Insider. The NL West is brutal. Realistically, Rockies are still a few years away from competing. We'll find out. We will find out. Is a few years 2026, right? That's 2 years. If they can take a step forward in 2025, 10-win improvement, then as long as you're about 5 games back of the final wild card in summer of 2026, you can reasonably say that, okay, we are now competing. Again, everyone's definition might be different. I might not necessarily agree with that's what competing is. And I might not necessarily, if I were a fan, I wouldn't necessarily feel great if you're 5 games back of the final wild card in 2026, and if it doesn't end up happening, you miss the postseason again, you go, hey, but remember back on July 31st, we could have done something. That doesn't really count for much. It counts for something, but it doesn't count for much. And then maybe 2027 is that year. So I would agree. I really would agree. Still a few years away from competing, but you got to compete in 2025 on an individual basis, on a team basis, compete with the other clubs in the NL West to get a little bit better. They've got to get better if they actually are going to get back to the postseason. 10-win turnaround. That's got to really be that magic number, getting to 71 wins. So we're not going to see that super bullpen again. Rockies are not going to go back to that, but maybe they go with two big arms for the pen, a big-time closer and one mid-tier reliever. So in December of 2025, maybe they're linked to Ryan Helsley of the Cardinals. Well, he'll be a free agent at that point. You might not even have just finished up his season with the Cardinals, because if Nolan Arenado doesn't get moved, Ryan Helsley is going to be the next guy up for the Cardinals to cut some payroll. But he'll go into his age 31 season. How about Liam Hendricks? Does that move the needle for you? He's got an option for 2026, but he'll be 36, and he could be a guy that closes out the 9th inning. You might not put him in that Wade Davis tier, at least the Wade Davis that the Rockies first acquired in 2018, when he was somewhat of a world beater with the Cubs there in the 9th. But maybe he's more of that Greg Holland, still an all-star type season. Or you can go Ryan Pressley, who'll be 37 after his final year with the Astros this year. And then as setup men, as that other big arm in the bullpen to go along with who knows how many other young arms that emerge this season. Vodnik, Chivy, Jaden Hill, Seth Halverson. I shouldn't have started naming all these guys because there's too many names. I'm going to forget some of them. Luis Peralta. And I'm going to just cut it right there because there's 8 guys that could really step up in a major way in 2025. You still want that veteran presence. You still want depth. You still want 4 or 5 guys that you could look down into your bullpen and say, we can get this done. Look at the Dodgers, how deep their bullpen has been the last few years in the World Series, where they can just run out a bullpen game because they've got that many guys that are shut down for 1 inning at a time. 1 inning plus. Absolutely. You want those young guys to emerge, but you might still need to go out there, get that closer, and get up a setup guy, like maybe a Kyle Finnegan, like Pierce Johnson or Brent Suter. Both those guys could possibly return. Suter does have a $3 million club option with the Reds for 2026. That's reasonable. He's worth that to the Reds. How about Taylor Rogers and Tyler Rogers? I don't know you're going to get both of them back, but they're Chatfield High School and Colorado natives. Either one of those guys would work out really nicely. A submariner from the right-hand side in Tyler, or a guy with closing experience like Taylor Rogers coming from the left side. Either one of those guys make the Rockies that much better, even if Vodnik, Peralta, Jake Bird, Justin Lawrence, Lucas Gilbreth, up and down the line, those guys that still need to prove themselves. If they prove themselves in 2025, you can still go out and acquire those relievers. In the chat, any word on Daniel Bard? Nothing right now. When I last spoke to him, he did say that he's still looking to pitch in 2025. He knows a couple teams that are more likely than not going to give him an opportunity. Might have to be a minor league deal, but he'll easily get a minor league deal. He is working on a book right now, so I don't know how that's going to complicate some things. But nevertheless, Bard, I think once he recovers from those injuries this season, he still could end up going and contributing for a team in 2025. Great clubhouse guy as well. Great to the media. All around good guy. Really enjoyed getting to know him over the years. Finally, wrapping up, Hall of Fame tracker. Hasn't been good. Hasn't been good to those Colorado Rockies. Keep in mind next week, going to talk with Manny Randhawa on Thursday about the class of 2025. What would his ballot look like? What would my ballot look like? What's going to happen going forward with these starting pitchers? No one's getting the 300 wins. No one's getting the 200 wins. What are we going to do about that? But the Hall of Fame tracker, great job by Ryan Spader, who keeps track of these things. Carlos Gonzalez and Troy Tulowitzki still yet to receive a vote. 32+% of the votes have been made public out there, or rather 32% have been calculated. 118 public ballots and 7 private ballots have been shared with Ryan Spader. Ichiro still at 100%. I don't know. I'll talk more with Manny about it. Will he be the first position player to ever get 100%? Why would you not vote for Ichiro? Because you're a curmudgeon? Tell me you're a curmudgeon without telling me you're a curmudgeon. Well, Bud, if Babe Ruth never got 100%, Ichiro Suzuki should never get 100%. Got it. You're a curmudgeon. But Ichiro looks to be a lock. There are no questions there. CC Sabathia, we weren't too sure about. Right now, he's at 91.2%. Could get in on the first ballot. Would actually be the first starting pitcher elected by the BBWAA to the Hall of Fame since Colorado's own Roy Halladay in 2019. Billy Wagner in his 10th and final year on the ballot is at 85.6%. Carlos Beltran a notch above at 76.8%. A lot of those private ballots that come in at the last minute, or at least stay private, they're more conservative. They're more small hall kind of ballots. So you want to be a good amount of ways above that 75% threshold, because once the final votes do get tabulated, usually guys' numbers do go down just a little bit. Andrew Jones shy of the 75% mark at 72.8. Really excited to talk with Manny next week. A lot more about the class of 2025. Really excited that everybody joined in, loading up that chat. Again, you could do it after a show. You can also load up the reviews on anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, you name it, the Rockies Insider. You can check it out. Also on the social medias at Rockies Insider, or follow me and all my coverage at Patrick D. Lyons or Patrick D. Lyons MLB. Appreciate all the love and support and all the momentum that you give me when you show up to listen to the Rockies Insider. But as I like to say, momentum, it's only as good as your next show. So I'll have to talk to you on my next show. See ya.